I'm going to turn recording on now. So, hello, how are you today?
I'm doing excellent. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you. May I ask you to please tell us your name and share anything about yourself that you feel comfortable sharing?
Oh, wow. Well, my name is Jim Vickers. I'm based in Cincinnati, Ohio. I am married. I have two children. One lives in Texas and one lives in North Carolina.
And tell us a little bit about who Jim Vickers is and your career and your causes and your work and anything that will help us get to know you a little bit better.
Well, I'm currently the president of Business Technical Services, and Business Technical Services is a pipeline integrity management company. And for your listeners that may not be technical or engineers, in layman terms, what we do is we paint. In layman terms, we paint, we inspect, we survey, we locate things or geospatially, and we do a variety of miscellaneous things in the energy space, primarily the natural gas space, and a little bit in the renewable space, primarily the solar space. I did 20 years in corporate, started my career with General Electric, aircraft engines. I worked for Battelle Memorial Institute in Columbus, Ohio, the largest private sector research and development company in the U.S. other than the U.S. government. I was director of product development and marketing for Lexus, done a fair amount of consulting work, private sector, public sector, and 20 years or about 18 years as a senior pastor.
Wow. That sounds like a very varied career, very, very interesting career.
Yes.
How did you end up in Cincinnati? Is that home or is that's?
No, actually it was the furthest I could go away from home and still be in the state. I went to college, undergraduate school, University of Cincinnati. So I grew up at the other end of the state near Cleveland, which is closer to the Pennsylvania border. Cincinnati is right on the Kentucky border. So it was as far away as I could go. My intentions were to go there for 1 year and then go out of state, and the rest is history. I never made it out of there.
That's pretty good. So you said your work and your experiences in renewable energy, and things of that nature. So where, I guess, there's a lot of discussion around about climate control and whether we're in some kind of, leg of climate change that may not be reversible. So how does things like renewable energy, and some of the things you mentioned you do factor into those kinds of things?
Wow, that's an excellent question, Rochelle. Let me put a disclaimer out here. I'm not as strong in the renewable space as maybe in the natural gas space, but in general, we are looking to reduce our carbon footprint in the United States of America. We want to be cleaner. We want our environment to be healthier. So renewables is the direction that we're going, both voluntarily and legislatively. Most states, most major investor-owned utilities have some kind of mandate to incorporate more and more renewables, say by 2025, 2030. I'm also in the natural gas space, and in the natural gas space, natural gas, for instance, is replacing fossil fuel or coal in power plants. Regardless of what is said, say in Washington, D.C., the reality is the reality. Natural gas is more plentiful today. It's cleaner. Most of our commercial vehicles are being converted from, say, a gasoline or diesel to some kind of compressed or liquid natural gas.
That's very, very interesting. I think, a lot of times, so this is a diversity chat, and people think that I only talk about, race or ethnicity, but to me, diversity incorporates a lot, right? So our environmental lives, our physical health, all of these things kind of touch on diversity in a broad spectrum, right? So if you live in a relatively rundown neighborhood, your neighborhood might have more trash, more pollution, more things that are not necessarily done. So if you live in a higher end neighborhood, so we had a few years ago where fracking was this thing. Everybody knew what fracking was. We heard it could cause health problems. And so there's that. So when you think about diversity in terms of energy and about the environment and the way we live, regardless of our economic status, is that something that there is a platform or a voice in the energy space to reshape that as well?
Wow, that's an excellent question. Yes, and it's very, very necessary. Diversity is a topic that is always talked about in this space. For instance, this week I participated in a solar. My company co-sponsored a Minnesota Solar Energy Association conference, and we specifically co-sponsored the equity and inclusion component. And not just in solar, but in solar, for instance, there are not a lot of people of color, particularly in leadership roles. There are not a lot of people of color who are managing payrolls or ownership in that space, and that is that's a growing space. It's definitely single digits. I want to say like maybe 4%, maybe at best. There are organizations that I've been involved in, like the American Association of Blacks in Energy, which is a major platform for diversity discussions, inclusion, equity, helping to educate people of color, for instance, about what's called decentralization. And the bottom line in layman terms is that people with higher incomes, middle, upper incomes, they're going to have their energy on microgrids, or their energy is going to be distributed to them locally, so to speak, out near their neighborhoods. The people that oftentimes are going to be left on the grid are going to be people from low to moderate income communities. And so there's a pricing issue there. If those people are paying for it, and they're already paying a disproportionate amount of their income against utilities, that's not healthy fiscally, and not necessarily healthy just environmentally for low to moderate income individuals, who often are people of color.
That's absolutely the case. And so one of the things that comes to mind, I worked at a law school a few years, and there was always the discussion about injustices, right? So you have environmental injustice, health injustice, economic injustice, all these kind of terms that flow out there. And yet still, we seem to be struggling with this. You mentioned the numbers in your area. That's not unique to any work, so how many Black people sit on Fortune 500
Right.
boards? How many Black people, and Black and brown, because I like to include my brown sisters and brothers, are in leadership roles? And to further that, to even know how to start a business, right? To know what you need to do to start a business. So in your work, have you served as a mentor or advised people or given people a sense of how do you get from point A to point B if you're going to step out like you have? And I assume that you had a very long career before you decided to go out and start your own company. Is that correct?
I was always dabbling, even while I was working, even back in the 80s when I was working with General Electric, I was doing stuff on the side, which is one safer way to kind of transition, while you have a, say, 8 to 5 or 9 to 5, you have a full-time source of income, is a good time to dabble. But so I've had a number of entities before business technical services. Like a lot of people, I've had some success and I've had some failure. I've been doing business technical services for 11 years. And I'm always encouraging young people. I'm always talking to young people about going into business for themselves. I did it as recent as yesterday. I met with 2 young men. One was 25 and the other was 35. And explaining to them the benefits and the benefits, the importance of growing into a payroll versus a paycheck. Right. A payroll is much more attractive to communities, to governments. Everybody's trying to recruit a payroll. Less people are trying to recruit a paycheck. Right. In communities of color, we need more payrolls. Right. And we need more good payrolls.
Yeah. That's very, very important to hear, and I think that the fact that you're talking to young people and kind of advising and giving people input is really, really interesting. But back to the question of injustice, right? So Flint, I'm sure you're familiar with the water crisis they had in Flint, Michigan.
Yes.
That was pretty terrible. Here in
Very.
Durham, where I live, so I live in Durham, and Durham is the whole home of Duke, and there are a few other entities here. RGP is a part of it. And so late last year or early this year, some tenants who lived in public housing experienced carbon monoxide flowing in their homes, and they had to leave, and so they were put up in hotels and all those things. And there have been some very fierce advocates in that neighborhood to talk about the problems that they experience. But if you don't have economic justice, can you have environmental or health justice?
Well, that's an excellent question, and I would lean towards saying no, Rochelle, because at the end of the day, it's all about economics. Economic injustice is in my opinion, the most significant injustice that we experience. It's great that we can sit in the front of the bus today, but we need to own some of the buses. One of the community that my office is in Cincinnati, has been fighting for 20 years about this firing range that is there, this city of Cincinnati firing range that, I mean, all day they're shooting bullets, and you got the casings going into the ground, and there's children all around. That's a community that does not have the political clout to get it moved. But more importantly, they don't have the economic clout. If they had the economic clout, in my opinion, they would have the political clout. I think they go together, but I think that the economic clout is more important to us. With the economic clout, we are going to have the political clout.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. So I want to go back and ask a further question about the climate change. So I grew up in the rural South. I was born in the North, but I grew up in the rural South. And, during most of my young life, people throwing stuff out of their cars, people, polluting, putting things, was never an issue. No one talked about it.
Right.
A few years ago, there was this big talk about the hole in the ozone layer, with, carbon emissions and all of those things. And a lot of companies are thinking about, so Amazon has got this commercial they run over and over again about being, having their carbon footprint reduced to almost zero in a few years. Is it rational and reasonable that me as a citizen, not a business, but just a home owner, an employee, can I impact the carbon footprint in the world? And if so, how?
Well, that's a pretty interesting and pretty phenomenal question. I think that number one, probably by setting a good example in your neighborhood, by keeping your lawn clean, your environment clean, even something as simple as maybe your garage clean. Number two, I think you're setting an example for your children and your grandchildren. I think they are the ones, in my opinion, that are going to suffer the repercussions of what we did yesterday and what we are doing today. And then third, just becoming maybe more knowledgeable about it, and then, sharing and kind of talking with your sphere of influence, how you take out, your garbage every week, or how you segment your waste in your home, becomes really, really important to the environment.
So with the work that you do and what your company does, so there's always someone trying to sell us some solar panels to put on our house. And, most times we kind of chuckle at that because it doesn't make sense. And I'm sure, a few years ago, everybody had that skylight in their house and it leaked, right? So, when you hear about solar panels now, people are a little bit leery because they don't know really what that means and how much does that affect their utility bills and things of that nature. Can you talk a little bit about solar energy and natural gas in terms of the homeowner, the individual?
Wow, so that's a really powerful question. You've got some meaty questions. Solar panels. Let me just stay with how the topic that you're talking about, diversity and equity, inclusion. Let me put it like this: the average African American community is not exposed to this yet because it's been cost prohibitive for the average African American family. My company today literally is involved in a project in Illinois with a solar client of ours and a natural client of ours. Business Technical Services has a solar client and a natural gas client that we brought together. And we are part of a team, including Department of Energy, a large natural gas company. And we are building, along with International Habitat for Humanity, we are building 45 low to moderate income homes that are going to be smart home. And what that means in this context is that they are going to run by solar during the day and natural gas by night. The cost per unit of power will be less. It is also going to have smart transportation, smart water. Everything will be smart. So solar is where we are going. Wind is where we are going. Feces is where we are going. Hydro is where we are going. Regardless of what we think about it, the leading edge people will be people with money. They are going to be there before the average family. But the project that we're doing in Illinois, the Department of Energy wants that to be a model for around the country for low to moderate income people.
That's amazing. So remind me when we finish this chat, I want to connect you with someone who I know that may either be a good partner or may have some insights that the two of you can share together. A young fellow, I think he's in his 40s, but he's been trying to do stuff in that space as well. So remind me to share that with you when we're done with our chat.
I will, Rochelle. Can I go back in a second too and maybe answer your question a little better too, a little bit more precisely. Solar today is not what solar used to be. The cost per solar panel is going to be less. I'm indirectly involved in a project in North Minneapolis where they're going to be doing a number of homes, pilot testing a number of homes that are in the African American community. And I'm partnering with someone who is very intentional about how does this person bring solar to the African American community, and understand that this person is viewed as the godfather of solar in Minnesota. So he's uniquely aware that it has not been in the communities of color, and he's trying to be intentional about bringing it to and articulating the value proposition.
Yeah. And I think that one of the things that I have done, so I am a extremely introverted person. I'm not the most social person in the world. And
wow.
I've worked in technology my entire life. So my first job to my current job has always been in IT and the computer side of IT. But what I have learned over time, and this is how I know your son, you have to advocate for those who don't understand, who don't have a voice, or who needs more information. And the information, what you get in social settings is a bit, you don't know whether it's true or not. You don't know how much reality you could apply to it. And for young people to come into my work, so I do my best to mentor and advocate, put some skin in the game for them. I think that what you do is one of those profound places where Black and brown people need to have a voice and need to know how this works. There is
Absolutely.
There was a study done, I think it was done in 2016. It's called The Graying and Browning of America. And it talks about the number of baby boomers, us people with gray hair, and, born in 1954 to 1964, and we're dying 8 a day. That's the rate of death between baby boomers. And then the number of other groups. So, not just Black, white, and Asian or whatever it is, but a number of mixed groups. And they call that the browning of America. So whether it be Latinos, whether it be mixed race people, all of those. So that's growing. And so the literature suggests that by 2030, there will be parity. There'll be no majority groups. It won't be all white, won't be all brown, it'll just be more of a melting pot where no one has power. And with your work, and this is what I often say to people, how are you going to gain power if you don't know what power is? So, if someone were Black or brown person who's been on the economic margins, we're now to be led or get into an opportunity to run a company, to run our energy answer or our technology answer, whatever it is, and they've no experience with that. That puts us and them in a kind of bad place. So it seems like to me that young people need to be engaged early, often, and it needs to be such that they are learning. So someone once said to me, the way you know something is you can teach somebody else that thing. And I think that's a component that needs to be added to all of these spaces where Black and brown people have not had a strong voice, have not had leadership roles, have not done this, but they need people to help them get there. And so for IT, I can do that, but there are so many others out there that can do it as well. And we just need to find a way to do it. So my question to you is like, how do you see outreach? So you mentioned when you started up, like your work area is not as diverse as it should be. How do you change that?
You have to be intentional. Like in my space, when I'm dealing with my large clients, they want you to have a supplier diversity program, and they want you to say 20% of your business to minority firms or whatever. I don't need a program to tell me to hire people of color. I don't need a program to tell me or to legislate that I need to connect with businesses of color. The issue becomes, unfortunately, for what I do, there aren't a lot of businesses that do what we do. Sometimes, again, we are drawn to what we see on TV, sports, et cetera, all of that. But how many young Black people or even adult people meet a cathodic protection engineer or a coating inspector? A coating inspector, someone who inspects someone who paints in my business, someone with a high school education. Some of these guys are making $100 an hour with no high school education. I've had a guy working for me that had a high school education that makes $172 an hour for a small company. That's a lot to pay. But no, I'm sorry, $172,000 a year annual salary. I was paying him like $65 an hour on a job, $65 an hour, plus $100 and some per diem, plus covering his vehicle costs. But that's still a pretty healthy, at $170 some an hour. You have people with PhDs in America that don't make that kind of money. However, here's the key, Rochelle. He had been in this business for 25 years. His dad was in the business. Although it's not real sexy, but most my parents, my father couldn't have been a coating inspector 25 years ago. I never heard of what I do before 2010. I never heard of it. But the pay is very, very competitive. It's called gray collar positions, technician type positions where everybody's not college educated. And I think that with the young people, what I'm seeing is what draws particularly young men is when you can show them the bling bling, tell me how I make the money.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think one of the most intriguing things about the way the world is today, young people are very technical savvy, right? So they know how to do things on the computer or the internet and all that stuff. But from my perspective, that's very surface level. It's not deep down.
Right.
So if your people has a virus or someone has hijacked your information and doing some ransom stuff, you need to get down. And so a lot of it is that I can say my generation, we have assumed once you saw it, you became intentional about doing it, so like I have two children. I have a 42-year-old daughter and a 22-year-old son. They are slower to respond to things than I would have thought they would be, considering how technical savvy they are. Like, so my son is a world recognized gamer. He's, does all this stuff. He's, highly sought after. My daughter is probably the best interior designer I can think of, and she's done work both for the federal government, but yet and still it seems like they're waiting. They're waiting for someone to say, here's the next thing you need to do, or come on, let me get you to this point. And I don't know whether that's because, we as parents, me as a parent, I've been too much of a helicopter parent and not enough of a advisor or guidance counselor, if you will. But more.
What's a helicopter parent?
One who hovers over their children all the time.
Got it.
Don't let them fall down, no bruises, nothing. Got it.
Got it.
But so maybe that's what's missing. But when you're hiring someone or you're looking for someone, what are the things that you look for in a person? So is it Martin Luther King's the character, or is it the commitment or the dedication or the technical savvy?
Wow, it depends. It all depends on the position, obviously. If it's a contract that I've got to do tomorrow and I've got 6 weeks or 2 months to do it, deliver, I need somebody who is technically savvy, who can go in and independently, I'm usually getting someone that's smarter than me to know something I don't know. I don't have that kind of technical background. However, when possible, usually they need a helper. So I'm usually putting someone who is not as technical, not as savvy. So there's a huge window of opportunity in my business for people with second chance people. I've got people that work for me that have been with me almost 10 years, that spent 12 years in prison, 15 years in prison. Great employees. And you're putting them in space that they can be competitive, because there are a lot of certifications in this business. Versus say a BS or BA degree, you get this, my company pays $5,000 for you to get this certification, and you're making, you can make $25, $28, $30 an hour, and you grow and move from there. So I think for me, again, it depends on the opportunity. Sometimes I need really, really specific technical skills, but more than likely for me, 8 times out of 10, I'm looking for somebody who's hungry, who's trainable, who's committed, and they want to go somewhere. I need you to want to go somewhere. I'm looking for young people who want to make 6 digits. I'm not looking for young people who want to make $17 an hour, because ultimately that doesn't help me. I need someone who wants to make a lot of money, because if they want to make a lot of money, then our company can make a lot of money.
Right. Absolutely. And that's a full walk of the path. Most people get on the path and say, I want to make a lot of money, but they don't think about it from the perspective of what it takes to get to that place. So,
Right.
Job, we become complacent and laid back. And so, here we are. Okay. So I want to know a little bit about Jim Vickers. I want you to tell us as much as you can about, where did you grow up, school? How did you become who you are today? What influences or factors help shape that? And the last part of that is, do you see other Jim Vickers in your work or in areas that you work?
Absolutely. I haven't always been where I am today. I've obviously matured. Today my work is my worship. My worship is my work. I'm extremely faith oriented. Again, I've been a senior pastor for almost 20 years. I'm extremely involved in what we call marketplace ministry, which is a growing area of ministry. I call it my playing glass versus my stained glass. It's not about what you do in the building; it's about what you do outside of the building. Your ability to disciple, not in the building, but outside of the building. Made a lot of mistakes, a lot of wrong terms. Had a lot of help along the way. And the interesting thing, Rochelle, too, one of the really interesting things about being in business I'm just being very, very transparent about it. We talk about us and helping us and doing for us. But at the end of the day, I have to be honest that I haven't gotten as much help from us as I would like to. My real help, particularly financially, has come from, my Caucasian brothers and sisters. We don't really seem to know how to help each other, and we don't trust each other. And when you got the kind of payroll I have, a 6-digit payroll, my family members I can't go to them and, I need $100,000 for payroll. They generally don't have it. A lot of my friends don't have $100,000 too. So, my white buddies, I text them and they go put the money in the bank for me. This is how I got here. I'm saying, because again, the reality is, if you're running a business, you got to be able to manage a payroll. All the rest of that stuff, you can have a PhD, but if you do not know how to run a payroll, you can hang it up. And if you can't handle the stress of a payroll, all that other stuff is window dressing. At the end of the day, if you're in business for yourself, you got to take the scripture and live it. You got to be able to esteem someone else better than yourself. In other words, you got to make sure that Johnny and Mary get paid first. If there's something else left, you might get paid. And you got to do that long enough till you can afford to get paid. And that ain't easy.
And I think that most people in business do not understand the entire structure of business. So you have a great idea, let's go put it out there. And they fail before, their first year or something because they haven't walked the path all the way through, right? So, you've got a good idea. What is your market research? What is it that you're hearing from others who do what you do? And if you're doing something no one else does, why is somebody going to buy it? Why does somebody want this? No matter how good the idea is, the question you have to ask is, why would somebody want this and what would they pay for it? And then once you get the ball rolling, can you afford staff that makes this work? And for someone who started 2 or 3 businesses in my life, I can tell you that's a challenge. It is a huge challenge.
Absolutely.
So there's that. But so I want to go back to Mr. Vickers. So you said that you were a pastor.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
So I pastored Ebenezer Second Baptist Church in Cincinnati for about from 1997 to 2010. So that's about 13 years. And then I started what's called Mountaintop Ministries, which was a non-traditional, non-denominational worship. But even at Ebenezer Second Baptist Church, which was a traditional African-American church, service 10:30, 11 o'clock. Back in 2006, I started within that same church what's called Mosaic Light. And that was a very mixed, all of my leaders, Rochelle, which was really ahead of its time. I didn't realize how ahead of its time. All of my leaders were senior pastors of pretty large churches. So they came to my church at 8 o'clock. We had a 1-hour service. It was 40% white, 50% African-American, 10% others. But all the people that played the keyboards and ushered, they were all senior pastors. That was really unheard of because in the church community, unfortunately, it's just like the other society, private sector. You have people of color generally going to churches that are led by white people, white leaders, but you don't often have white congregants who are going to churches led by African-American leaders, and even less would you have white leaders going to an institution led by an African-American leader. So I was kind of ahead of my time there, and that's part of my background. That's where I've been all my life. I've always been kind of that guy who had to integrate. You're the only guy on the floor, the only guy in the department. I'm sort of used to it. I'm one of 2 families in my elementary school. My elementary school was all white. So I kind of grew up, I guess, prepared for the role. I'm in business today. All of my clients I don't have generally Black clients because my clients are large utilities. And the people that run these departments, like a corrosion department, they're generally going to be white.
Right. And so that's a very important thing. And I think that kind of ties us back to diversity, right? So how does that change? And I think that a lot has been said, misinformation out there. So, there was the defund the police, and I don't think anybody was thinking of that in the pure sense. We were talking about maybe helping the police learn how to deal with situations that are not always just some kind of violent action. Somebody's having a mental health break, you have a mental health person come with them or a social worker. But when you think about our society as a whole, almost everybody I talk to in every place I've been have said, oh, well, we're going to get a diversity officer, or we're going to think about diversity, and we're going to create all these programs. But to me, it's just talk, like I think what you said earlier, intentionality, right? Should be intentional. So if you have an opening for a position in an organization, it's easy to go with the homo social reproduction. I prefer to be with people who look like me. But there's also a benefit to having someone who looks very different from you, not only just in skin color, but in education, aptitude, all of those things differently. So how does that change? How do you see that changing, within our society as a whole?
Are you talking about that role of, say, a supplier diversity person or a diversity person in an organization? What are you asking about? What do I see changing?
So diversity as a whole within the entire structure of the global marketplace. So,
Gotcha.
Who are you hiring, and why are you hiring that person? And I think I say this correctly. None of us wants to hire somebody just to give them a job. We want somebody who's going to make money.
Absolutely. So I would position it like this. Number one, I think everything starts at the top. So when I think about the corporate scenario, I'm not talking about the C-suite people. I'm talking about maybe the board level. You need to have people of color on the boards of these organizations, because then they can flow down policies, et cetera, that make sense. They can, they can help with the strategy that says, hey, we need to hire people that are different. And then I think that you need people in the C-suites who are over these departments that can help kind of educate people. Because, Rochelle, what I found out is a lot of people, it's not that they don't like people of color. There's a lot of fear. They don't sincerely sometimes know how. The unique thing about running a company like I run that's very interesting, I've been so exposed to a diverse population so long. I'm in a really unique place. And I'm in a unique place because most of the white professionals that work for me have never, ever worked for an African-American firm. How many college-educated white people in America, livelihood, their family's livelihood, it's dependent on someone of color? That's very unique, especially like in a place like Cincinnati. But every Black person in Cincinnati that is college educated, that has a good job, they're going to have worked for a white person. So just educating folks, being able to facilitate a conversation about this kind of stuff ain't easy, but it is essential. And then the last thing I would say that we have to be able to do is, if you really want to convert them, you got to show them why it's profitable. How is my bottom line going to improve by hiring someone diverse? And that's I think that's the key. So that's kind of the people side. And then on the business side, we're facing the same thing. They're just like they don't want to hire people of color. They don't want to hire a company that is diverse, because for 20 years, you've been dealing with Joe Blow Corporation, who's white owned, maybe has one or two Black people. And basically what they're doing is circulating the money.
Right.
So we get jobs now. We get decent jobs with decent titles, but oftentimes we don't have the juice to make decisions. But when you really want to create some change, try to ask for a piece of the economic pie.
Absolutely.
When Johnny Corporation gets a contract for $1 million, our company only gets 100,000 or 50,000. That's the reality. If we get $1 million, trust me, Johnny Corporation is getting 10 or 20 million. That's the reality we deal with.
Right. Absolutely. I think we all know that. So that brings me to my question about where we are right now in terms of race in America. There's been a lot of violent language used, and I mean, for Black people, that's not unusual, right? So, the fact that our white brothers and sisters are becoming aware of the that we live in, but we've been living with this for years. It's not like this is something new. We know, we see this, we recognize this. But, what we have different now is, so back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, probably even part of 80s and early 90s, these things weren't recorded, right? They weren't videotapes.
Right.
They're cell phones recording everything. So now it's much more visible what's happening.
Yeah.
But me personally, I cannot process how every single day there's some incident that happens where a Black person is on the wrong side of that incident. So you had the fellow in Rochester, he's having a mental health break and he's dead, right? Or a man trying to resolve an issue and he's dead. Like all of these things why do they keep happening? So what is diversity for Black and brown people? What change has to happen for Black and brown people to be seen as equals, to be seen as humans?
Wow. Rochelle, I wish I had a real honest answer. I think I have I think I have some input, but it's going to take everybody. It's going to take Washington. It's going to take General Motors. It's going to take Google. It's going to take Second Baptist Church, First Baptist. It's going to take the Universal. I think that I think the church plays a more significant role than we might think. I think that the place where hearts are changed are probably not the corporate environment, but the faith community. I think the faith community has to take a more leadership role, but you can't have the faith community siding with what's wrong. You know, they've gotta stand up for what's right. I recently co-hosted an event in Hamilton County for like judges and people running for prosecutor. Let me give you this one statistic, and this was alarming to me. Again, I don't know that I have the answer, but learning what the real issues are sometimes. So in juvenile court in Hamilton County in 2019, of all the young people under 18 that were bound over to adult court, 100% of them were African American. Zero whites, zero white kids. Same crimes, but a different route. You put the black kid in adult court. And here's another interesting stat. I got this from a white lady running for juvenile court who shared this. Think about this. When a young black kid comes into a courtroom, they are perceived as older than they are. That's deep.
It is, really is. But you can also use that to think about crack versus the opioid or the mental health epidemic, right? So when young black people who were selling or using or whatever they were doing with crack, they got harsh penalties.
Right.
You know, we had the 3 strikes thing come along, but now that opioids and meth are a thing, it's an addiction. They have a mental health problem. They need mental health things. And to me, that slaps right in the face of what is racism and what is not. Because I don't know how different crack is from any of these other drugs. I've never had any experience with them, but I just think that if you have a person who is addicted to something and they can't control their behavior, they must have a mental health issue or some other kind of health issue. This is not about the color of that person's skin, you know, so you're absolutely right. You know, it's 2 different tracks. So we have about 5 minutes, so I'm going to leave the remainder of the time to talk to you, and anything you wish to say or share with us is all yours.
Well, I will. One of the things when you asked me about how I got here or whatever, I think the other thing that I left out is family. You know, been married for almost 40 years, and I think that's really what made the difference. Created a level of stability that without that I probably would not have. So that's been pretty important. That's been pretty important to me. And then number 2 is so many people have reached out and helped me along the way. I'm more than motivated to reach back, and that's something that I'm really interested in doing. When you take the concept of discipleship in the faith community and you apply that to the business community, how do I help create other business technical services? To me, that's what is a key indicator of success. How do I not just motivate other young people maybe to do what I do, but to do it better, and not just tell them how to do it, but create opportunities for them to do it. And I think we have to just be more intentional about that, because if we don't do it, no one else will.
I think that's very, very, very important out there. And I think that I did a chat with Charlie Nelms, who was the president, chancellor at North Carolina Central for a good little while. And one of the things he said that really struck me, he said, whoever we're waiting on, they're not coming. We are they. You know, we are the people we need, not waiting on, you know, there's going to be another Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and whoever we ascribe to, but it's just us. And getting us as Black people and brown people to like each other. Because I think something you said earlier was really pretty powerful, right? So we don't give our dollars to people who look like us. Okay, we're gonna go to the barbershop, we're gonna go to the soul food restaurant, but we kind of stop right there, right? So Black doctor, Black business, whatever it is, you know, how do we support these organizations? And if you're expecting white people to give us the answers, they're not, because they want your dollars to go to them, right? So they want you to put all your Bank of America versus Black Bank, or they want you to use this verse. So you've got to figure out how to help yourselves and stop, you know, falling into that Jim Crow trap. We're past that now. You know, we need to recognize the value of what we are to each other. In terms of money, you know, we put almost $38 billion in the economy every year, and yet and still that's not got you a seat at the table. And it's because we haven't come together as a people.
Absolutely. You're absolutely correct.
Yeah. I am so grateful that you chatted with me. Winston was dead on. So thank you for this. I really, really appreciate this. And I would like to invite you to come back and chat with me later on to explore more about your work. I think that what you're doing is really, really powerful work. I mean, you know, the planet that we live on is fragile, and we keep doing stuff to it every single day to make it out of balance. And we need to figure out how to correct that. And so I hope you'll come back and chat with me again.
Thank you for the opportunity. Have an excellent day.
You do the same. And I'm going to send you an email because there are a couple of people I want to connect to you. And maybe, you know, they might be some value to you and you to them. So please.
Thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely. So thank you very much. You have a wonderful weekend.
You too.